KVO. If you like the way we play, listen with the Texas Playboys, KVO. And all day long, sing the song.
Now, Joe.
If you get this song,
Course you will.
you can't go wrong. And now we will fun, make things right, make you happy from morning to night with the Texas Playboys, KVO.
Here is an interview with O.W. Mayo, which was recorded on February 24, 1961, at Cain's Ballroom in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which he purchased in 1944. O.W. Mayo, whose whole name was Oliver Wendell Mayo, became the manager of Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys in September 1933. So that you understand some of the remarks made in the interview, a little context is needed. Bob Wills was a member of the Light Crust Doughboys and WBAP in Fort Worth, Texas. In late August 1933, Bob Wills was fired from WBAP by the station manager, W. Leo Daniel. Bob left the Light Crust Doughboys show on WBAP, where he had been performing since 1931. He took 2 members of that band with him to Waco, Texas, Tommy Duncan and Kermit Whalin, and 2 others, June Whalin, Kermit's brother, and Johnnie Lee Wills, Bob's brother. They would soon add 2 others to the band, Don Ivy and Bob's cousin, Son Lansford. They went to Waco, Texas, where they appeared daily on WACO and played dances in the area. On September 20th, 1933, at the band's first dance at the Woodman Hall Dance Hall in downtown Waco, they met O.W. Mayo, who lived in the city at the time. Mayo was impressed by how hard the group worked and offered to get them bookings. They accepted his offer, and he soon became the band's manager. They were an immediate hit in Waco, and in those Depression years were soon making more money than they had made in a long time. With almost 4 months of experience under his belt, in late January 1934, Bob Wills decided to leave Waco for Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Wills, Mayo, and the Waco announcer Everett Stover, WACO announcer, who would later join the band as their announcer, drove to Oklahoma City to see if they had a future there. When they arrived there, however, KOMA would not let them on the air due to the fact that the Light Crust Doughboys were already playing on that station via the Texas radio network. So they made a deal to begin playing on WKY in Oklahoma City in late January or early February 1934. They made about 5 broadcasts, and then W. Leo Daniel, the manager of WBAP, made threats to the management at WKY and got the band thrown off the air. O'Daniel had a reason for his threat. Once Bob left WBAP, the Light Crust Doughboys show was not as popular any longer. Stopping the band from performing anywhere was O'Daniel's way of getting back at Bob Wills and getting him to rejoin the Light Crust Doughboys. Darrell McAllister, the program director of WKY, told O.W. Mayo of a brand new station in Tulsa, Oklahoma called KTUL. So they started out there, but on the way, O.W. Mayo pointed out that KTUL only had 250 watts of broadcast power, while KVO had 25,000 watts of broadcast power. They could get a wider audience with KVO, so they decided to go to KVO first. They explained to the management at KVO what O'Daniel had done to them, and the manager of the station, Bill Way, decided to put them on the air. They were an immediate hit with the public. O'Daniel tried to get them thrown off KVO for the next 2 years, but it didn't do any good. Bob Wills had found a home in Tulsa. O.W. Mayo was born in 1901 and died in 1994. This audio of his interview isn't great, but you can understand most of it. Do me a favor and click on the red subscribe button below. YouTube will never bother you with any emails. They just want to know if you're watching my videos or not. But if you ring the bell, you will receive a notification when we upload a new video. It's your choice. And with that out of the way, here we go.
Well, what I wanted to ask you about was, I read in a book, a magazine here a while back, where Al Franklin got Bob his program over KVOO, and said that this program was originally supposed to go to a Don Douglas who had a jazz band, and it said that it was going to be it was a nationwide program 2 times a day. And I wanted to ask you about that. I wasn't of the opinion that was a nationwide program.
Well, I don't know where that kind of information ever got out. Now, there was an Alan Franklin that who really wasn't with KVOO at the time we came here, but he did join the station later and became program director and worked a lot with Bob during Bob's early days on KVOO, but that was sometime after he came here. Now, we got on KVOO pretty much by accident, I'd say. You know, Bob originally started his radio career on a program in Fort Worth, Texas, known as Light Crust Doughboys. He was on that over the Texas Quality Network for, I'd say, some 2.5 years, approximately that. That included stations in Houston, San Antonio, and Fort Worth. And, of course, WBAP also is got studios in Dallas and is recognized as well as WFAA when they switch over, but they're on the same frequency and they divide time on that station. Bob left Burr's Mill, and that was the sponsor of the Light Crust Doughboys show, in September 1933. And I joined Bob in Waco on the 17th of September in that year. And on about the 1st of February of 1934, we came to Oklahoma City and did some work on WKY. In fact, we thought we had a permanent setup where we had made arrangements to come on the station, and they seemed to be quite enthused about it. But after we were on the station about 10 days, we were called in by the program director and were told that the president of Burris Mill had contacted them with reference to a program that Burris Mill was carrying on another station there in Oklahoma City, KOMA, I believe. And see, Bob had been on that particular show, and WKY had been trying to get that program over on their station. So we were told by Darrell McAllister, who was program director, that Mr. O'Daniels, the president of Burris Mill, had called him and told him that he'd been considering moving the Oklahoma City program over to their station, but as long as Bob Wills was on the station, that he wouldn't consider it any further. And they felt like if they took Bob off the station, that they had a chance, or at least O'Daniels left them with the impression that he would negotiate with them or consider moving the program over on their station. You see, O'Daniels was quite peeved at Bob because he left the Light Crust Doughboy program and took 2 of the boys with him. Originally, there was only 5 boys. Well, originally, there was only 3 boys on the show, but the Burris Mill show, but it grew to 5, and when Bob left, he took 2 of the boys with him, which only left 2 boys on that particular program. Of course, naturally, they could replace Bob and the other boys, but it wasn't Bob Wills. So anyway, McAllister called us in and told us that in view of the fact that they felt that they would be able to get the Light Crust Doughboy show from another station there in the city, that they was going to let us go. But he suggested that we come to Tulsa, and there was a new station just opened here in Tulsa, KTUL, and Mr. Gillespie was manager of this station. So he called Gillespie and asked him if he'd be interested in a string band and Western swing band, and he told him that he would send us over. So Bob Wills, myself, and Everett Stover, Everett being the announcer, and also played in the band. He had joined us there in Waco. In fact, he was manager of WACO, the station there in Waco, when Bob came down there and went on the station. And so when we left there, he came with us to Oklahoma. So Bob and I and Everett, we got in the car and drove over to Tulsa. And on our way over here, we got to discussing the stations. And since KTUL started out originally as a very small station as to power, I think it only had 250 watts, perhaps, or maybe 500 watts. And at that time, KVOO had 2,500 watts, which was, they were the biggest station in Oklahoma. So we got to discussing the possibility that since we were coming over here, that there might be a possibility of getting on KVOO. So we decided before we go to KTUL, although the management of KTUL was looking for us, that we would go by and see the management of KVOO. So we went in, the manager wasn't there, and but they called him at his home. We told him who we were, and they knew about the Light Crust Doughboys show that Bob had been on, and knew something little about Bob. Anyway, that he was the fiddler on that particular program, so they called the manager, Mr. W.B. Way, who came down to the station. So we had a short session with him, and he sat there and listened to our story, and we told him what we thought we could do. And he didn't make much comment until he says, "Where's the other boys at?" We said, "They're still in Oklahoma City." He says, "How soon can you get them over here?" And we said, "Well, just as soon as we can contact them." He said, "Here's a telephone." So we used his phone. And that was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I guess. So we called the boys, and of course they were standing by waiting to hear from us anyway. And so they loaded up, and here they came to Tulsa. And they put us on the air that night at midnight with kind of a special program. They felt that we'd be able to reach out and cover a lot of territory. For some reason, I don't know just why, but anyway, they put us on the air. And that was on February the 9th, 1934. And so we went on the air, and we made an offer. The one that wrote a card or a letter from the furthest distance, we would send him a picture of the band. And you'd perhaps be surprised to know where that letter came from. It came all the way from Oakland, California. 25,000 watt station. But that hour of the night, why, of course, naturally the station got out a little bit better than daytime. So anyway, we got the letter from Oakland, California, and of course we sent the picture. Then they set us up on the station, and we were alternating with an early morning show and then an evening show. We wasn't going this morning. We'd say we'd come on, and I don't recall whether it was 6:30 or 7, but it was pretty early in the morning. And then the next day we'd come on around 6 in the evening, and we were catching two different audiences: the early rising audience and the evening audience. And of course, in those days, radio was still not too old and was very popular. Everybody had radios. And so just a minute, we'll catch his phone. So we worked on that early morning show and early evening show for, I guess 10 days or 2 weeks before we even attempted to book any engagements. So our finance was getting pretty doggone low. We, of course, none of our wives were with us, none of the families were with us. We came to Oklahoma City, and it so happened that we hadn't really gone too far, made a lot of plans, and we were renting apartments down there. Pretty fortunate in that respect before we got the boot off for WKY. So we started out, in the meantime, when we had called the boys that evening about 3 o'clock and told them to come over. We knew they were coming. We had no place to stay, so Bob and Everett and I, we got in our car and began to drive down the streets and look to apartments, places where they were for rent, and so on and so forth. I also got a local paper and looked in the ads. And so we drove down on South Elwood, 900 block, and as the lady had a sign up there, and so Bob happened to be making that contact. And he told her who he was, and she had heard his show numerous times and was quite a fan of his, and she had a basement apartment. It wasn't anything fancy either. And she was a little short on beds for the entire personnel of the band. There's about 8 or 9 of us. But she said, we'll take care of that. We'll get some rollaway beds and so on and so forth. We'll take care of it for this evening, and then tomorrow we'll get this thing fixed up a little bit more. And the result was we rented the basement apartment and moved in. And as I say, we stayed there about 10 days, 2 weeks before we actually started to work. We began to talk and publicize on our radio shows that we were available for dances and public appearances and so forth. So it wasn't long until about 2 weeks, I guess, we began to get calls, and we was able to set up a steady schedule of dance engagements. And some of our most successful ones in the early days there, I think really the first one that made us any money was over the little town of Oilton, Oklahoma. Of course, in those days, Oilton and Drumright was going pretty big in the oil business, developing oil over, and there's lots of oil field workers and so forth. And so I remember a friend of ours, Mr. Scott, he was quite a fan of the band, and he set us up there in a upstairs dance place. And we went over there, and I don't know, I think we made $150 to $200, which was big money in those days. And then a friend of ours down in Seminole, Oklahoma, a great fan of the band, Asa Lee, who was connected with one of the oil companies, the American Legion. They brought us into a place called the Old Winter Garden there. And there was some of our more successful early engagements. And of course, in those days, it was a Commonwealth organization, pretty much. We took the actual cost of operation out, and what was left, we split it among the personnel. And it wasn't but a little while until we were able to bring our families in and rent our separate apartments. And pretty soon the old basement apartment that we originally moved into was vacant. And that was the beginning of Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys. And Everett Stover was the announcer, as I said, on the show. And Bob and Johnnie Lee Wills and Kermit and June Whalin and Tommy Duncan. They were the 5 that originally started, that left the Burris Mill organization and came down to Waco. Bob and Tommy and Kermit Whalin, they were on the Light Crust Doughboy program. And Johnnie Lee, Bob's brother, who joined him, he was driving a truck for Burris Mill. And of course he quit that job and came with Bob. And then June Whalin, the brother of Kermit, he was a salesman for a typewriter, or adding machine, or office supply house there. And so he started the program. But in the meantime, we'd picked up a son, Lansford, which was a cousin of Bob's and Johnnie Lee's. He'd joined us in Waco. And then there was another chap came with us from Waco up here, named Don Ivey. Of course, Don was he was a good musician, but I'd call him a rolling stone. He never stayed much in any bands much, And he'd work some with us, and then he came up here and didn't stay but just a few days and left, went back, and then he came back to Oklahoma with another band called the Alabama Boys, but he didn't stay with them long. He went back to Texas, and although a good musician, but he, I don't know, like a lot of fellows, he didn't stay to the job. But since those, following that, while there were several of Bob's old friends joined him, and later Herman Arnspiker, which was one of the boys he left on the Light Crust Doughboys show, joined him not too long after we came up here. And Sleepy Johnson, the other boy who he left on there with Herman, he later joined him. And then Leon McAuliffe, the boy that went to work on the Light Crust Doughboy program, replaced Kermit Whalin as a steel guitar man. He later left that program and joined us. And of course there was not really a big turnover, but Bob eventually worked his band from about 5-piece organization up to around 15 or 16 men. And if you recall, he later added horns, and he had a pretty good brass and reed section. one time I think he had about 4 and 4, about 4 in the brass and 4 in the reed section. And of course it wasn't long after we came to Oklahoma that it seemed like his popularity just grew and grew and grew. And it wasn't long until we were offered a recording contract for with Columbia. In those days, I believe we were recording on the Vocalion label, then later on the OK label, and then later on the Columbia label itself. So our first recording session, I believe we held in Dallas, Texas, and then we held a recording session in Chicago, and then we held a recording session in Fort Worth, using the Bowers Mill Studios, I might mention, that they originated their radio program out of. And starting with Art Satherley, who is known in the trade by all the Western folk music artists. He was a great fellow. He was an Englishman, but he did a lot for a lot of people, especially those that he contracted for Columbia. He was a great old man. They, of course, later since retired him. But all in all, I think that Bob's success, it'd be pretty hard to put your finger on just what made him so successful, because there were several things involved. And first, now Bob was not what some people would call a musician, because Bob didn't actually read music, but he knew his instrument. He was a natural born fiddler. His father before him, and even his grandfather, on his mother and father's side both. They were what we would call old-time fiddlers. But Bob had that sense of rhythm that the average person didn't have. When he played a number, I don't know, you just automatically found yourself patting your foot, tapping your hand, keeping time. And he had the ability to inspire those about him. Now that is, to my way of thinking, his own personal ability, and then his ability to inspire those about him and to get them to follow him in the same vein that he was playing. I think it was the secret of Bob's success. Bob liked people, and he made people like him. Sometime I wonder if, there is a penalty to popularity. After you reach a certain stage and you become really popular with people and they love you, your time becomes their time when you're in the public. And that's the thing that it is hard for a lot of people to take. Now, he can go out on a job, the average person can, and work 4 or 5 hours. When he gets through with that 4 or 5 hours, the average person likes to be able to go and do the things that he wants to do, probably retire to his room and go to bed. But Bob is the type of fellow, he can't shake people off. He don't want to. In the first place, he don't want to. As long as there's some elderly person or young kid or somebody around to want an autograph or want to shake his hand and want a word of conversation with him, Bob just feels that he has an obligation to them because they're friends and friends. And it takes its toll, because you give after a fellow works for 4 hours, and then you got to stand around and visit and shake hands and autograph for a couple of hours. That's almost as like working in an actual job. And I think Bob Wells, if he was working at the North Pole in the nude, he'd perspire because he just puts everything he has in it. And it takes a lot out of it. And honest to goodness, all these years, now let's see, that was in 33, and here we are talking to you February 24th, 1961. Gee, that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's almost 30 years. And that'll make a young man, oh man.
Yeah,
Despite the years itself.
Just me trying to keep up. I'll tell you what, me just trying to dig it up now, I'm getting kind of old. I mean.
Well, he's a great fella, and still doing good. Bob's still good. He's still a great showman. Well, of course, as long as Bob plays that fiddle, he'll be that showman. And it's a natural ability. He's really unconscious of, I mean, of his emotions and of his little dances and gyrations on the bandstand. He actually feels it. I mean, he lives it. He has the most natural ability of any fellow I ever saw when it comes to entertaining people. In his particular vein, he's not a comic. Bob don't try to be funny. He has his own little gestures and so on and so forth. But he is we just call him a real honest-to-goodness fiddler. A sense of rhythm that the average person doesn't have, and he has the ability to inspire the other fella in the same vein. We'd have drummers, for instance. You know, the average drummer, they're different drummers, and they've got their own style, their own routine, their own beat, and so on and so forth. But you know, Bob had his own beat too, and I don't recall ever having a drummer that he couldn't change him right over to his particular style of rhythm, and that was one of the secrets of the popularity of Bob's band as a dance band, because everybody would tell you, well, if you can dance, you can sure dance to Bob Wills' music, and if you can walk to it, you can keep time to it, and that's just not simple, but it wasn't altogether simple. It was just a natural sense of rhythm that Bob had. It was different, that's all. And Bob had a great family. Bob's father, Uncle John, which he was very commonly and affectionately known, he was a great fellow. And Uncle John was really the old-time fiddler. Uncle John, I don't know. Some of the old fellows might tell you that he could beat Bob fiddling, but I don't think we could agree that he could actually beat Bob fiddling, because Bob had just a little bit more to it, and Uncle John really had more of the old-time style. But he was admired by all the older people and the young people as well. He was a great fellow. And he passed on, of course, I don't know, some 5 or 6 years ago, I guess it was. And then, of course, Johnnie Lee came along with Bob. Johnnie had played the banjo in the early days, all the time. And then later, of course, he got on the fiddle himself. But there's only one Bob Wills.
That's right.
And they threw the model away when they made Bob.
I'm going to ask you, during a funeral of Uncle John, was there a big crowd? Did you go to his funeral?
Oh yes, there was a big crowd and a terrific floral display there. Of course, there was a lot of people that didn't know Uncle John like they knew the boys and members of the family. Of course, they moved here to Tulsa. Uncle John and him and the others of the family, they moved here to Tulsa. I'd say in 35, 36. Of course, after then Uncle John moved back down to Texas on a farm that Bob bought down there for a while, for 2 or 3 years, but then they came back here. And, of course, the whole family had the ability to make friends, and they had a wide circle of friends. It was a packed audience as far as the funeral. It was a large funeral. And out of respect to him and, of course, to the family, the boys. Of course, Bob at that time, Bob had left Tulsa and lived in California at the time of Uncle John's passing. But there was lots of people there.
What kind of a church was that held in?
Well, no, it wasn't held in the church. It was held in the funeral home, the chapel at Moore's Funeral Home. Brother Pringle, Steve Pringle, he was preached the funeral, and he certainly did a marvelous job. Of course, he had known the family for quite some time, and Uncle John, when he was a little boy, and it was held at Moore's funeral home, the chapel there.
Is Mrs. Aunt Emma, is she still living here?
Oh yes, She, I say lives here. She visits among her orange children, and then she still has some sisters living in East Texas. That's where she and Uncle John both grew up and married down there in down Hewitt, Centerville, and which is south of Mahara on Highway 75, in that general area where they grew up. She was a Foley, and there was a large family on her side. She had several sisters and brothers. Of course, some of them's passed on the last few years, but she still has some sisters, and she visits down there quite a bit. And then Bob and Luther J. live in Las Vegas now, and she also has a daughter living in Las Vegas, but lived there before Bob and Luther J. moved out there. And then she has Johnnie Lee lives here, and she has a daughter who lives in Phoenix, Arizona. She has two daughters that lives here. And so among the children, she makes her home. And I think it's nice that she can spend her last days with the children and buy a visit from one to the other and spending a week or 2 weeks at a time. Why, it makes it like a visit with it all.
Mr. Mayo, when Bob left Tulsa, then did you take over Johnnie Lee's management?
Yes, in fact, the business, Johnnie Lee started his own band here even before Bob left Tulsa. It was about around 1940, Johnnie Lee organized his own band, and he was on KVOO with an early morning program, and I was doing the announcing on that program, and was booking Johnnie Lee as well as Bob. And then, of course, came along here in 1942, and Bob got this motion picture contract with Columbia to make, I believe it was 8 Western pictures he and the band was supposed to work in. So what Bob did, he took 2 or 3 boys that was in Johnnie Lee's band, because in this particular motion picture work, he only wanted the string section. So he took Cotton Thompson, who was a fiddleman on John's band. He took Harley Huggins, who was a vocalist on the band. And of course, Tommy Duncan was in the service at that time. And Harley was a vocalist, and so was Cotton. And so he took them, and so Johnnie Lee then took over the other portion of Bob's band that he left here and carried on the noontime program that we had at that time, was sponsored by General Mills. So Bob went out there, and he first made 2 pictures, and then he made 2 more, and then I believe he made the other 4 right in succession. So when he had completed these pictures, Bob knew that he was up for draft in the service, knew that he was going to be drafted, so he just didn't wait to be drafted when he completed these pictures. He just went on down and joined the Army at Fort Sill. Well, I guess he actually joined it here in Tulsa, but that's where they assigned him, to Fort Sill. So then that left Johnnie Lee, while he was in service, I left Johnnie Lee head of the band here on KVOO, the noontime show for General Mills. And so, of course, I just continued booking the band just like I did with Bob. Then when Bob came out of the service, of course, after he'd been out there on the coast doing this picture work, and incidentally, he had played several dance jobs out there between pictures, and saw the possibilities of the band out there, and Bob was that he was quite popular, and of course there's lots of Texans in Oklahoma that migrated out there, and it was just like old home week, a lot of those places. So he wanted to go back out there, and of course, I think Bob realized too that if he came in here, that of course they'd have to combine the 2 bands, that it would be that Johnny looked like had things going pretty well here and was doing a pretty good job, so he just going out there. So he did. Well, consequently, I didn't go with Bob out there because in the meantime, I had the lease on the ballroom here, and my children were in school, and I had my own home, and was getting along, and was working with Johnnie Lee and wasn't having to go on the road with him. So I stayed here with Johnnie Lee, and he goes on out to the coast. And I think he was a very wise move because Bob did a terrific business out there. There was still lots of employment, and there was, I said, there was lots of people out there who knew who Bob Wills was from his recordings and so forth. And then Bob had the ability to, you went to see him once, you'd go again and tell others and bring others with you. And of course, that's a secret of success. And he did much, I'd say he did the biggest business that he ever did in his life was after he came back from service. After he came back from service out there on the West Coast, he do some terrific crowds. He'd do some crowds up around 7,000 and 8,000 people. I mean, at dances. I don't mean some big park appearance. I mean the actual paid admission to dances. He did that in Oakland, he did that there at Venice Pier, and all this.
Leon, did he come on to take Tommy's place, or just how did he come on?
That's right. You see, Leon Huff, actually, the first time that I ever heard of Leon, he took Tommy's place on the Light Crust Doughboy program when Tommy left that program in 1933 and came with Bob down to Waco, where I joined him. So Leon worked there on the Light Crust Doughboy program for years, and Tommy lost his wife the first part of 1942 while he was with the band here, and by the way, for some reason, I don't know why, but this must look like it was his. Pardon me, tough luck. I don't talk of losing his wife while they called him to the service. So he went into the service, and so then Bob brought Leon up here and took Tom's place on the band. And then, of course, after Bob went in the service, he stayed right on the band with Johnnie Lee. And then, of course, later, he, like most of the rest of the boys, sometime or other during the war, he went to service and spent, the usual term, served overseas. And, of course, at the close of the war, he came back. He joined Johnnie Lee's band when he came back over the service. He didn't go to California. His family also lived here, you know. He had a couple of children. His wife lived here all the time when he was in the service and had his home here. So he chose to stay here in Tulsa upon his return from service, and he joined Johnnie Lee's band when he got back. Leon was a great vocalist. He certainly was. He was one of the best ballad singers and hymn singers, I believe, that I ever known. Had a terrific voice, and the average person just to see Leon wouldn't hardly take him to be a vocalist, but he was. He had one weakness, I think. I don't think Leon didn't have the knack of singing what we'd call a fast, rolling or rock and roll type of song. His was strictly more on the ballad type. Yeah, but he did a terrific job there, and he sang marvelous in a quartet or duet or trio or what kind of.
I was going to ask you, when the Alabama boys, when did they come up here, and did Bob get some of them, Lewis, Turney, and Harley, were they on with the Alabama boys at that time?
Well, not until they had disbanded. Earlier in our conversation, I told you that this Don Ivy came with us up here to Oklahoma when we came, and he was only here, I'd say a month, went back. Then he came back up here and organized or got together. He brought this Cotton Thompson, was a Texas boy, and then Cotton had a brother that was more or less the booker, business manager for it. And then he picked up, Harley Huggins was down here at Shawnee, and I think also Lewis Turney, and the Mansell Turney, which was Lewis's brother, he was down there around Shawnee. And Eldon Shamlin, I'm not sure just where he found Eldon at, but Eldon's parents lived at Weatherford, Oklahoma. Anyway, this boys from Texas, this boys from Oklahoma got together, and They called themselves the Alabama Boys. Don Abbey, he kind of, I wouldn't say Don stole the name, but it was, back in the real early days, around the 1930s, there was a couple of boys that worked together, called themselves the Alabama Boys. Lou Chilry, he now, in the last several years, been on the Grand Ole Opry. And Riley Walker, he's been there in Oklahoma City for years with Gene, what's Gene's last name?
Sullivan.
Gene Sullivan, Riley and Gene. Well, anyway, in about 1930, Wiley Walker and Lou Chilly worked together on, down there in Texas, and they called them the Alabama Boys. And so Don did a little work with them, and that's where he got the idea.
Where he got the idea.
And Lou Chilly calls himself, when he does a single, the boy from Alabama. And of course, I think his theme was Alabama Bound, But anyway, that's where Don got the idea. So Don he had a lot to do with getting the boys together. They got together and came up here. And then Don didn't stay with them. He didn't stay with them. They got together. But those boys, they stayed together here for quite some time and were on KVOO themselves. And Alan Franklin, he's the fellow that you spoke about earlier that did some work with Bob. Alan Franklin, he worked with those boys and made some appearances with them. And then, I don't know, I imagine the war came on and they began to break up, and some of them went in the service, and pretty soon the band broke up. And of course, Lou Attorney, he had a bad foot. He limped in his walk, and the result was he didn't have to go to service. And of course, he did later join Bob. And then Harley Huggins was working with. He joined Johnnie Lee, and was working with him after the Alabama Boy broke up. They must have disbanded about 1940.
1940.
Something around that. It could have been 41, but it might have been 41, but it's around 1940, 41. And Harley Huggins, I say, he was one of the old Alabama boys. So was Louis Turney, and worked with him. And Eldon Sherman. Eldon worked with Bob, for a long time before and after the war. Of course, Eldon, he did a hits in the service. So did Harley. Most of the boys did. And they had a good little band. They had Cotton Thompson, of course. I think Cotton, he was a good fiddle man himself, and he was a great blues singer. Of course, he joined Johnnie Lee. That was one of the first records Johnnie Lee made, was featured Cotton on the Old Milk Cow Blues.
Yeah.
That was a good record, and Cotton did the vocal on that, and it made a terrific business.
I was recalling that some of the original Alabama Boys, Doc Eastwood on banjo, and Carl Rainwater played the steel.
Yeah, Carl Rainwater played steel and was a good steel man. Carl was a good man, a good steel man. I don't know whether Carl or Doc, I don't think either one of them was, say, the original, that started out originally with them, but they'd like a lot of the other bands, quite a few different people went through the organization, Just like Bob, you'll see a lot of fellas say, I started out with Bob Wills and I played with him all these years and so on and so forth. And maybe they happened to sit in as a guest on one or two occasions.
That's about it. Well, I'll tell you a little funny story. Charlie Huff, you know him? Charlie Huff in Oklahoma City, he put out Petonia, that song Petonia.
Oh, yeah, I know of him, but I really don't know him in person.
Charlie said that Bob put him to work with the band as vocalist, and he was going to put Tommy with Johnnie Lee to start Johnnie Lee out. But he said he decided not to go with him because he decided to join the medicine show. I want to ask you about that.
Oh, I got that position because, listen, Tommy was, no, he wouldn't really replace Tommy with anybody. Because, I'll tell you, to me, Tommy, Duncan and Bob Wills is kind of like ham and eggs. And Tommy could just stand up there. you couldn't beat him for ability to stand up there all night and sing. You just couldn't. Or there might have been some people who could do a better job on certain songs than Tommy, but when it comes to really working, being on the job, dependable, well, you just couldn't replace him. He just got that type of boy. And he loved to sing, and he did a terrific job. No, I don't think that Bob ever had any idea of replacing Tommy on the show, as long as he was with him. Of course, as I say, he left in 42 and went to service, but came back and did work with Bob since.
Well, at the death of Milton Brown, did you all go to the funeral, or did anybody?
Bob did. Bob, and I'm not sure that Tommy did. Bob was off on the road. I was on the road at that time. When I heard about it, I was traveling. About the time that happened, we were working with General Mills, publicizing Playboy flour and Playboy bread. And as it so happened, why, we issued the franchise on this Playboy bread, and I was handling that from a business standpoint. And when that happened, he died following an automobile accident, or in an automobile accident. And I was down in Fort Smith, Arkansas, in that area, working with a General Mills salesman, calling on some bakery accounts. And I heard the boys' program at noon one day, and they made the announcement. And Bob, as I recall, Bob went, and maybe some other members of the band, I don't recall just who. Just who.
Could it be that the song they recorded, If I Could Bring Back My Buddy, was that kind of maybe a tribute? They never did mention Milton, but they were singing to somebody.
Well, I'd say that in the recording that perhaps Milton's passing was more or less inspired the manner in which they did the number. Let's put it that way. Of course, they had did this old number a lot of time. It was in their repertoire, and on certain occasions, when it would work while they did the number. But and it could have been that the passing of Milton might give Bob the idea, made him want to record it. Just more or less, they were very close. They worked together there. Started out there on the Light Crust Doughboy program. Originally, it was Milton Brown, Bob, and Herman Orangeberger, just the three of us. Fiddle, guitar, and vocals.
And I bet that was great. I was going to ask you something. Well, wait a minute. Shelley Lee, did Shelley Lee Alley ever work with you?
Shelley Lee Alley?
Uh-huh. He had a group known as the Alley Cats, and he's dead now, but he played around Fort Worth and Dallas.
No, not now. Of course, he might have. No, not after I joined the band. After I joined Bob. Now, he might have worked some with Bob around Fort Worth when Bob was there with Light Crust Doughboys. Bob might have known him, but he never worked as a musician in the organization after I joined.
As a musician?
No.
I was thinking he recorded on some of the Jimmy Rogers records in San Antonio, and somebody said, well, he worked with Bob Wills around Fort Worth to Dallas.
Well, he might have made some guests, but he was never a member of the Light Crust Doughboy organization. I know of course, I didn't know all about the organization, but I knew. I've heard him talk about it. And then, of course, after September 1933, which time I joined Bob, he left.
Could you tell me if Art Davis was here with his group at the time Bob was here, did he come in afterwards?
Art wasn't here, I don't think, during Bob's days. He was here during Johnnie Lee's days, after Bob went into service. But Art wasn't here, I don't believe. I don't believe he came here that early. No, I'm sure he didn't.
He didn't come here that early. Mm-hmm. I believe he worked at KTUL. I don't even know what years. I've been corresponding with him.
Yeah, Art was here on KTUL around the middle 40s.
Around the middle 40s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's my best recollection. It's around the middle 40s. Could have been as early as 44, 5, 6, along in there.
Do you remember at the Lieutenant Governor James Berry and a picture that was in the Tex Ritter songbook that showed Lieutenant Governor Berry shaking hands with Bob, and I think I can see you peeking around the corner in the picture. Do you remember what the occasion was? Tex Ritter was looking between the two of them, I believe.
Well, I don't remember the incident of the picture, but Lieutenant Governor Berry was a great friend of Bob's and a fan of his, and of course, you know, he was Lieutenant Governor so long in there and on those years, and a lot of time served at functions when the governor himself was unable to be there. And it's quite possible that that was taken in connection with the premiere showing of Bob's first picture, which was with Tex Ritter, the title being Take Me Back to Oklahoma, I believe. And I know we had a pretty big day here. We had a big street parade, you know, in connection with the opening of that Tex, and Bob rode. Bob had a couple of nice white horses, a little pumpkin, and another horse, I can't think of his name. There was dignitaries here, and I think that was the occasion. I believe that was the occasion that Lieutenant Governor Berry was here, and in connection with the premiere showing of the picture throughout here in Tulsa.
Bob Kerr, did he ever come around did he know Bob or?
Well, I don't, not that I recall. You know, Kerr himself, he was elected governor when back in 44, 48, 42. Was it that early? 42, I guess it was. Well, you see, Bob went in the service. That year 42, the last several months of that year, the last half of that year, Bob spent 90% of his time in California doing these 8 westerns. And then, of course, as I say, he came back and he went into the service between Christmas and New Year's Day in 42, the last days of 42. Let me put it this way. A representative of Bob Kerr's came to us and wanted to make a deal with us to do some work in connection with his political campaign. And I told him that our schedule just wouldn't allow it. And in the first place, we didn't, it wasn't Bob's desire to get mixed up in anything political. I mean, he had too many friends. If you go to work for a guy, you got to go all out for him. Well, gee, in a political campaign, you've got friends on both sides of the fence. And Bob couldn't do it. And I told him, I said, we just, in the first place, I said, our schedule won't hardly let us do a job that you'd expect us to do. And then I said, in the first place, again, we probably, as much so in the first place as the second place, we'd rather not get mixed up with politics. So he says to me, he said, let me ask you this. He said, if you don't work with Bob Kerr, will you promise me that you won't work for nobody else? I said, well, I don't feel like I should have to make you any promises, but I said, we're not interested in working with anybody. And it isn't our plans to work with anybody in connection with a political campaign. And I was speaking, of course, for Bob Wills. And so that's the way it really went. That's the way it went as far as I worked with Bob in his campaign.
Did the band play at the inauguration of Governor Marlin, 1936? Or on the state capitol steps or something?
We played in connection with the inaugural ball. They had 2 bands. Now you got me when it comes to the dates, but you're not sure it was 36 or 38?
I think it's 36.
Well, wait a minute. Let's see. The governor, if Gary was elected, if Kerr was elected in 42, well then who was elected in 38? So you had to be 4 years back, and then you'd have to go back to 34.
Now Leon Phillips is in there someplace.
If I'm not mistaken, that's probably Phillips is who we yeah. His inauguration we did. That would have probably been 38.
38.
Well, anyway, Of course, he was elected in 38. It might have been 39 when he took office. But we did play was a part of the inaugural ball down there in one of the inaugurations. Maybe that was Phillips. I'm not sure. We did we had two bands. They had a shall we say a pop band or a popper band. It was a horn band, and then they had Bob there, and we played next with the inaugural ball. Doggone, there's a lot of things. Dates.
A lot of water run over the bridge.
Yeah.
When did you first start making your tours back into Texas? How long was it?
Well, we of course we went back to Texas. We came up here in February of '34. I'd say we went back down there within that year. Went back down there. We didn't go back, let's say, maybe for 5 or 6 months. But I remember we advertised there on WACO for Jones Fine Bread, which was the name of the maker there. And so that year, sometime later that year, we went back down there, and we had had a little stretched out Chevrolet bus. And so I know we played a date in Seminole, Oklahoma, and so Herman Arnspager, who was driving the bus, and myself, we went on down to Sherman, Texas, and the boys come down by plane. We had a friend that was flying a plane here, and so he flew the boys down. We met him at Sherman, and we went on to Waco, and we met him there. And we did a broadcast, I know, out to the airport. And we were talking, I was talking to Mr. Jones about the time when we left Waco, and we were working with him. And we was driving a big old Lincoln sedan that looked like a bunch of gypsies when we left, with the instruments tied all on the top and baggage and so on and so forth. And the boys' return trip was by plane.
By plane. That's going back in style, isn't it?
Back in style. And so that was that same year in 1934. And then, of course, we'd make, I don't know, every 3-4 months we'd make a trip back down in that direction. Texas way.
Do you remember any places in the spots in San Antonio you used to play down there?
Well, we played the municipal, we'll call it the municipal auditorium. I'm not sure that that's the correct name of it, but it was the city auditorium, the civic auditorium, where they held all their big shows and so on and so forth. And we played there. And then we played, I can't recall those names. There's 2 other places that we played there. There was a fellow that was with Public Service Company. He had a place out there just at the edge of San Antonio that we worked at. And then there was a chap, he was a disc jockey there on one of the stations. There's another place there in San Antonio. But as to the actual name, I can't give it to you. No,
did they play any further south in San Antonio?
Oh, yes. We played in Corpus Christi and Laredo.
Laredo? You played Laredo?
Yeah. Gee. We played in connection there. We played 2 years in succession there at Laredo. They have an annual celebration there that it's held during Washington's birthday. And, Washington's birthday is one of the dates. And I forget what they call it. It's got a Spanish name. Of course, it's right on the line of Old Mexico, just across the river from Old Mexico. And they make quite an affair out of it. It's kind of a fair. It's a kind of a big carnival. They have a stock show in connection with it. And we played those engagements out there at the high school gym. We played that 2 years in succession.
2 years in succession. Do you believe that when San Antonio rose got so popular around, I think it was 1940, do you believe that when Bob went back, of course, to San Antonio, that really brought brought him up to fame as far as that area down there, and that song and him?
Well, you know, that was a funny thing. I'm serious about it. It didn't. I was a little disappointed at the response. We had a pretty nice crowd, but the response that San Antonio actually gave vent to that particular number. They never did. I mean, they never did do anything outstanding or make any comments. I never had any particular correspondence in those days with any city officials or any civic organization. Or I felt that I think it's pretty much slipped up on them, the popularity of it. I don't think they was really aware of how popular that the tune was going to be and did come to be, and how important San Antonio was, the importance that it lent to the city itself. I don't think they ever did attempt to capitalize on it.
I noticed that when I went down there on a couple of trips, it seemed like, oh yeah, that's pretty solid, and that's just about it. I mean, really.
Well, I was, of course, we never threw out any hooks or never tried to really. We felt this way about it. If they felt like it, we did something that the band had, Bob had, it would give their town some publicity and so on and so forth. That it was their move, so anyway, I was just a little bit disappointed in the reaction.
Well, when they recorded the song "Home in San Antonio," now there's two songs right there about San Antonio that Bob recorded. Danny Alguar sang the vocal on that, and I thought that would really actually break it loose, but I think Roy Acuff's rendition must have.
Well, I think it was. I think "Home in San Antonio" was a good number, as you say, but it didn't compare to San Antonio Road. It was a kind of an anticlimax. I mean, if you want to refer to it in that manner. Nobody played second fiddle.
Played second fiddle. I'd like to ask you, was Bob and Spade Cooley pretty good friends?
Yeah, I think so. Now, I never knew Spade too well. The only time I ever worked with Spade in connection, with the bands, was with Johnnie Lee's band. We played some double band dates with him out there with Johnnie Lee's band in '47. That was with Johnnie Lee's band, and I would say that as far as I knew, Bob and Spade were good friends. But I know Spade admired Bob very much.
I found a picture here a while back of Bob and Bing Crosby. Was Bing at the time? I think this is from the picture I seen right around 1942 at one of the movies that he was making. Showed them drinking pop together. Do you think that Bing Crosby and Bob were pretty good friends? Or do you think that did Bing ever come around the band? Or?
Well, here's the first time that Bob and Bing ever met was here in Tulsa.
Here in Tulsa.
That was during the war days, the early days of the war. Bing came here and was playing a game of golf here at Seven Hills Country Club. And it was a war bond campaign promotion. So Bing was playing, and so we goes out there. Of course, in the meantime, Bing had recorded San Antonio Rose. And so we go out there with the band, Bob and the band. We go out there to the golf course, and Bing came in after his game, and we had a broadcast set up there, the band, Bing, and so Bing did San Antonio Road. The band played, and Bing sang, and somebody bought $5,000 worth of bonds, we'll say, for the record. KBOO made a transcription of it, and who bought so many dollars of bonds, that bid on it, bought that many bonds, why, he got the record. So Bob and Bing met on that particular occasion, and of course afterwards they goes on in the clubhouse and sat around and visits and reminisces a little bit about the business and the trade, So then when Bob goes back out there, goes to California making these records, Bing and his boys, one day, they drove out on the set that Bob was working on. And that's the picture that you saw, I think. So they were, they didn't have a big lot in common, you know. Bob Wills is a little bit quite a different entertainer type than Bing. But Bing admired Bob. I mean, Bing is the type of fellow, he's just like Bob Wills. Bing admires the other fellow's ability to do something better, you know what I mean? And vice versa, because everybody give him separate, give him praise, help get better.
But I ask you something, Lee Sullivan told me that Gene Autry snubbed Bob when he got out of Hollywood. I won't put that in print, but anyway.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, I never heard of it. No, frankly, I never heard of it, because I know one time we were out there and Gene invited us out to come on the set with him. And it so happened that we got out there late and we had to be at the gate at a certain time. You know what I mean, on their sets, and this cast, they move on somewhere else, you know, and you can't just go in and out from in out there. I think one time we got out there and it was too late to get in, and they had certain hours of district live, but we went out there and stuff with him. And he appeared on Bob's show several times here, and I don't recall anything of that.
I'm not going to just that's some more reading.
Oh, yeah, they can get a lot of those things.
Mr. Mayo, looks like we're running out of time. I want to thank you very much for making this tape for me. As I said, I still think you're the Dr. Mayo of the organization, so if you don't mind me considering you that way, why?
Well, I just happen to be the man associated with the band and reached the picture of success. And just happened to be a shock at Grover Jordan. It's been a pleasure to listen with you and talk with you. I like to reminisce about the old days, the good old days. They only made one Bob Wills. He modeled away. He's one of the greatest guys you ever met. And Johnnie Lee and all the boys, they're great people, great family people.
I certainly admired it. I've heard of you for years on the radio. I was wondering what you look like. And I never dreamed I'd see the day I could get to talk to you.
Well, I hope you're not too disappointed.
No, not a bit. I couldn't be disappointed.
Thanks for watching my video. Click on the button below here and go to my website, www.exploringthepast.net.
Head down, Billy.